Right, a very good morning, everyone. I'm Charlotte Hamill, COO at Born Social, and I'm delighted to be hosting our final event of 2020. Hello again to all of you who have joined us before, and a very big welcome to anyone joining us for the first time. Like many, our webinars started back in April amidst the first lockdown, and here we are 9 months later, still dialing in regularly. I believe we've had over 2,000 marketers join the session in that time. So at the very least, we hope we've contributed to the industry's learning and views on social media this year. In a short while, I'll be handing over to some familiar Born Social faces, our Strategy Director, Callum McCann, our Head of Strategy, Essie Nurmanen, and our Creative Director, Paddy Smith. But before we get into today's content, I'm sure you all know the drill by now, but please do make the most of our super panelists through the Q&A function at the bottom of your screens. These guys seriously are some of the best social brains around, and they are at your fingertips. So fire them your questions because we've got some time at the end to get through as many as possible. The regulars amongst us will know that we always follow up with a recording of the session and links to the slides. And because it's Christmas, there might even be an extra little stocking filler in there for you, but you'll have to read it and see. Okay, so you're on mute, a familiar phrase of this year, and so that can only mean one thing. Yes, today we are looking back at the year on social, but giving a summary of platform updates, frankly, just wouldn't do justice to the transformational year that 2020 has been for social media as a marketing channel. So instead, we want to focus on the fundamental shifts that we've seen and believe are permanent changes to how social media is not only viewed, but used within advertising. So these key takeaways are going to be absolutely key for your 2021 strategies. So get ready to listen and take notes. Before we get into the real content, I'd like to try and get us all into the right headspace and reflect on our personal experience of social this year. And I have a few quick polls for you. So I'm going to give you like 10 seconds to answer them. So go with your gut. A quick game is a good game. I hope you're all ready. There might be some delay. Let's launch our first poll. Number 1. Have you used social media more or less this year? You've got way more, a bit more, same as 2019, less. I should be able to click. Fantastic. Votes coming in. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay. Poll number 2. Have you embraced any new platforms like TikTok, Twitch, or House Party? Remember House Party? It's a moment in the spotlight. So you've got in a big way, dabbled, no. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Very good, everyone. Poll number 3. Did you engage with any features for the first time? So it has to be new features, but first time dabble. You bet I did. Had a play? No. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Poll number 4. Did you participate in any social activism? I got loud, I shared, I liked, not really. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Almost done, guys. Don't worry, doing a great job. Right, poll number 5. Overall, has social media had a positive or negative impact on you this year? Positive, neutral, negative. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And final question for you. Did social play a bigger role in your marketing strategy than planned? Yes, as planned, no. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. There you go. Great job, everyone. That was much higher levels of participation than I expected, so thank you for that. Hopefully you're nice and warmed up. We're going to come back to those results at the end of the session. Without further ado, Callum McCann, I hope you're ready and not on mute. Over to you.
Yeah, that would be embarrassing given the title. Thanks, Shah. Today, I'm going to be starting off with a case that social has become a lead channel this year, and going to be making that case by talking through some interesting points that we've seen. So social has always had its fair share of critics in the industry. There are a lot of people who, I guess, do not agree that social has been able to build brands on a big level. It's been able to be an effective platform, has kind of made its case in the wider marketing mix. I think that went into turbocharge in 2019 when Lush announced that they were leaving social, they were switching it off. And this news really sent the critics into overdrive. This was the thing they needed to prove their case that social was not a meaningful channel in the mix. And it's fair to say that social has sometimes had a bit of a reputation as not a serious channel in the mix. You've got TV, you've got out of home, those classic channels that really do have demonstrable effectiveness, and then social is about viral tweets, give it to the intern, that kind of reputation. And in some cases that's been fair, but I think that has been gradually shifting over the last few years. And social has, I guess, been making its case for moving away from just being seen as a support channel. But I think in 2020, we saw that was kind of flipped on its head because of three main things that happened, three forces, three shifts that we've seen. And that's what I just wanted to talk to you about this morning. So the first thing is scale and attention that social has seen this year. The second thing I'm going to talk about is digital and how what digital means has evolved pretty drastically. And thirdly, I'm going to talk about the constraints that brands have been under this year and how these three forces have culminated in social making more of a case for lead channel status, which I think is very interesting. So first of all, scale and attention, potentially the most obvious point to everyone, but social has really played the role this year of the connector. As we've been more isolated than ever, lacking that connection, I think social has really been the place where people have been turning to gain that connection in times of isolation. I found it really interesting looking at Facebook's growth, Facebook obviously including Instagram, WhatsApp, etc. And it's notable that they kind of have been struggling to grow quarter on quarter in terms of their users across 2017, 2018, 2019. And then you look at the spike in users they saw in 2020, particularly in Q2, which is when obviously the pandemic began. And you can see that this really was a big driver for people to become more active on the social platforms and really use them in a more engaged way. And it wasn't just usership. We saw that attention was massively on the up. So across pretty much all age groups, across the whole world, people spending more time on social, more attention, more eyeballs, more engagement. And this means that it really did play a key role this year. And I think when you look at particularly for younger demographics, this is from the IPA Touchpoints piece of research, social media is now the leading channel in terms of media for brands and attention. I think if you are targeting younger audiences, but increasingly older audiences as well, it does make sense that social is your lead channel because it has the most attention. I think that has been exemplified this year. Second point is around digital and how digital has shifted this year, because I think we've seen more change than any other year for a very long time. And I think it's interesting to think about the history of social over the last 10 years and think about what's changed this year. So from the years 2002 to 2012, we saw basically all of the big social apps that we know and use today were founded and came to prominence in that period. So Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Pinterest, Snapchat, YouTube, they're all founded in that kind of that decade, the golden era for social. And then from 2013 to 2019, we've basically seen no new apps take a lot of prominence, take any share from those as groups. Nothing really has come to the fore, which has been quite interesting. And then this year, you look at the new things that we've all been talking about. Not all of these were founded in 2020, but they all came to prominence. So House Party, Zoom, obviously, TikTok has been turbocharged this year. Things like Clubhouse, Among Us, all new social experiences that have come to the fore this year. And COVID has clearly been the trigger for that. Which is interesting. It feels like we're entering a new generation of what social means and stands for, that we haven't had for a long time. And when you look at what these social apps are, they're not the same form as the era that came before. I've heard the word social plus being used quite a lot, which I think is an interesting way to think about it. These new apps are taking existing categories and adding social features, and that's what they become. So you take social plus music, you get TikTok. Take social plus gaming, you get Twitch. Social plus fitness, you get Strava. Podcasts, you get Clubhouse. Plus finance, you get Robinhood. These are all previously digital experiences that are becoming social. I think what we're seeing is that basically all digital experiences become more social in nature. I think that changes how we define what social means, and particularly for brands, how we think about it as a channel. Actually, it's just a collection of lots of different experiences, many of them what we previously referred to as digital. And finally, obviously, this has been a year of huge constraints. I think that has been where social has played an increasing role. So we saw brands having to pivot very fast. When you have to get a message out very quickly about how your business is changing and your new offering, social has clearly been the place to be able to do that. Production in isolation, we ran a few talks around this. It's simply getting good enough content produced in times of lockdown. Social really came to the fore as the platform to be able to do that, to have the outlet, to be able to get stuff made and out when expensive, big, long-term TV campaigns simply weren't possible. And finally, we've seen that budgets are under huge pressure and will continue to be over the next year. I think that social has really been able to make the case for being able to get more from less from budgets pretty well for brands this year. We'll see that continue as well. So when you take these three kind of big forces that we've seen this year, the scale and attention that social has had, the way that all of digital is gradually becoming social in nature, and these new constraints that brands have had, I think you really start to see that case for social being a lead channel for brands in the marketing mix. Why wouldn't it be when you look at these three shifts that are happening? I think it was interesting to look at the way that brands approach Christmas ads this year as kind of a marker of that. Have always been the last stone unturned, the kind of the holy grail of the marketing calendar, and usually always just TV based, and saw more and more references to brands taking a social first approach to their Christmas marketing, which I thought was almost the culmination of what we've seen this year. We can see from the Walk Marketers Toolkit, which surveys CMOs from lots of different brands. We look at the media channels that are expected to increase in investment next year. All of them are around online, influencers, gaming, mobile, etc., all kind of platforms that we're talking about here. And finally, I couldn't resist going back and checking out how Lush were approaching social this year after the news last year that they would be giving it up. I was quite surprised to see that they've actually been leaning in quite heavily this year with lots of social first content. To be fair to them, they're not doing paid ads, but they are still leaning into the social first features. They've set up an Instagram shop. They're going live with product launches on their Instagram. They've set up a new TikTok profile, doing IGTV series. I think it's fair to say they haven't quit social, and they're probably leaning in more than ever this year. I think this is a good indicator that social has really played a big role for brands this year, even the ones who had moved away from it last year. So 2020 was the year that social made the case for lead channel status. It kind of laid down its gauntlet. It showed what it could do. I think in 2021, we're going to see more and more brands rebalancing their marketing mixes and starting to put social more at the center of it. I think we're starting to see that social can really play that lead channel role that other channels can follow. I think on a final point, it probably changes the way we talk about what social first means. I think social first has become a term to talk about almost execution. How can we take this this asset and make it social first with executable techniques, using the right format, etc. But maybe actually the emphasis goes more on the first part. It's about ideas and campaigns and concepts that start on social and then inform outputs, executions on other platforms as well. Maybe that's a better way to think about what social first really means going forward. So that's my case. That is why social has made great strides towards that lead channel status. And I think that is going to only continue next year. And with that, I'll hand over to Paddy Smith.
Thanks, Callum. Morning, everyone. Yeah, I'm going to be fighting the corner for creativity, keen to explore the case that I think social has become the defining creative platform, a real epicenter for creativity and for collaboration this year. So what I'm here to, I suppose, make the case against, is that social media is becoming more of mindless media, I suppose, and that the passive experience is leading the way. I think this is a mindset being spurred on by the publicity around its negative impact on attention spans, the sheer volume of content that we all get served, and also, I suppose, the aggressive mentality that we as marketeers have towards getting attention in amongst it. But I actually think that social has played an instrumental role in getting us all more creative this year and bringing us all much more closer together than ever before. So I've got 10 minutes to make this point. So I thought, why not try and make it with a Jason Derulo song, which, fingers crossed, if all things technical go our way, we can hear 10 seconds off this morning.
Oh, babe. Good morning, America.
Right, yeah, I think that's probably enough, Jason Derulo. So yeah, just 10 seconds I think is enough to make that point. And don't worry if you didn't know what that song was or what it's called. I didn't know until I researched it, but it's called Savage Love. It's his biggest song of the year. And you may not recognize the song, but you'll probably recognize that high-pitched sample at the beginning, undoubtedly from the depths of a TikTok hole that you refuse to admit that you've been in too many times. And that sample is called the Laxed Siren Beat. And it's kind of stolen the show as one of TikTok's most famous dance challenges this year. That sound has been at the heart of what is the Savage Love challenge, a dance routine that's been recreated millions of times on TikTok in millions of different ways. And so much so that Jason Derulo actually recreated his music video built out of his favorite versions of that from TikTok. And now that sample there you can see on the left has amassed nearly 54 million uses, which is pretty astonishing when you can see the music video itself on YouTube on the right has only got about 10 million more views. So nearly as many people who've watched the music video have then gone on to go and create their own version, which is feels like a pretty incredible case study for people's want to be involved and to create for themselves. And I think we've seen this notion of capitalizing on co-creation time and time again in 2020 with artists like Drake being more overt and blatant in it with the song Tootsie Slide, where the lyrics to the chorus are literally how to do a dance routine. For those more in the moment, organic moments of magic, it would be pretty hard to talk about 2020 without spotlighting Ocean Spray, but the infamous Ocean Spray Fleetwood Mac collaboration, a pure moment of magic on social that then has, I suppose, organically triggered a whole new world of co-creation surrounding it. And I think this mentality is perfectly captured in what's been called the rise of this duet culture, where there is an expectation that content is commented on or reworked or recreated all together by those who are consuming it. And this is my personal favorite. It started on the left with one single dramatic song at TikTok in a supermarket and has since gone on to encompass about 15 separate people all building an entire TikTok musical about what it is to be in the supermarket, which is pretty incredible when you think about it. And again, I think this is shows us that there is that want, if not, I suppose, an expectation to contribute to what we're being served. And this may, I suppose, feel all like fun and games, but I actually think it's quite a monumental shift. I think 2020 really has felt like a turning point for the notion of passive consumption. And instead, we're ushering in that era of much more democratic creative, of co-creation, and of a wanting to be involved and have a sense of ownership of what's going on. I think Of course, this feeling has been accelerated by the uniqueness of this year and what's going on in the world around us. It's driven boredom levels to an all-time high, opened us up to the notion of imperfection and our want and need for joy to get us through this. And actually this year, of course, has felt much more like this, much more substantial overlaps. And really it felt like that big area in the middle was the opportunity, and that is what's fostered this more fluid approach to content creation. And of course, we saw this manifest quickly in the real world with things like the Rainbow Project, which provided kids with a creative outlet, but also a sense of community and belonging when doing it together in collaboration. And then, of course, we saw this mirrored quickly in the digital world in our want to band together with humor and with sarcasm to ultimately stick two fingers up to something that's trying to kill us. And this collaboration mindset has extended to some of the most creative and influential people in the world. We saw artists like Charlie XCX announce and share and collaborate on building an album together with her fans over Twitter and over Zoom, something that traditionally is quite an elite process, you know, artists going away behind closed doors with high levels of expectation, production and involvement. And actually, this feels like a very different take on that tradition and a big step forward, I think, in breaking down creative barriers, democratizing art and showing a bit of vulnerability in that creative process. I think really we all know that great social is far from mindless. It really has proven this year to be democratic about when it's giving people a place to have their say, have a sense of ownership. So it's co-creation, it's challenging people and pushing them to come back to you with originality and creativity. And it's collaboration, building something new together that is ultimately better than what can be done in silo. So I'm keen to go through each of these and just show you some of the brands that I think have applied this really well in 2020. So starting with democratic, this idea of giving people their say and having a small sense of ownership over what's going on. I think we've seen this quite consistently in the world of food being applied in what feel like small, tactical, but I think really smart executions. You know, the likes of McDonald's when they started a debate on what they should use as their song to reopening, sparking that conversation on Twitter, but ultimately coming full circle to feature it in their ad and show that people have had involvement in what is a massive piece of marketing for them. And over to like brands who have kind of really built this audience first approach into the heart of their business and their product decisions, where they regularly ask their fans what should they veganize next. They listen to what they say and they serve it back, and they do what they say in that. And you know, the fans have a real sense of ownership of what's going on in the business on a broader scale. And similarly, Dave has done this really well, taking it kind of one step further, almost bringing in their audience for this sense of a digital workshop, asking them to bring new taglines to their original show. And I think this is a great example of when your tone of voice is really well established and consistent across everything you do. Your fans are able to pick that up and play with it and take it to places that you wouldn't necessarily go yourself. And then on social as co-creation, really, I think, again, this is about challenging your audience, pushing them to come back to you with originality and with creativity. I think more broadly, we've seen a shift on what we are defining as challenges, going from something that felt like it was quite large scale, quite a big investment, something linked to a specific cause, to actually something that feels like it can be integrated into the everyday. And brands are putting it into their always on sort of evergreen approaches. Getty Museum, I think, set the bar really high in the middle of the year with asking their audience to recreate their favorite pieces of art, which came back an abundance of creativity. And of course, this is, I think, where, you know, platforms like TikTok really come into their own for setting, but also collating these challenges. So this was by a brand called Too Faced, where they launched their new Born This Way foundation. And they created this sort of before and after challenge, which integrated an AR filter to kind of brand it and make it all, collect them all together. I think because of that simplicity and that consistency, it was massively successful. I think they had 450,000 people take on this challenge with, as you can see, 2.2 billion views, which is pretty outstanding. And then finally on social as collaboration, really, again, it's about building something new together with the audience, and that's better than what can be done in silo. And Converse is a great brand who's built collaboration into the heart of what they do on social. They did it perfectly with their Create at Home campaign, where they kind of prompted their audience and pushed them to inspire and create something new, build something new to get them through this year. And they asked their community, they pushed them to create and share and fuel all forms of creativity, from art, from music, from sport and fashion. And they went on to support and specifically bolster that community with commissions and monetary investments, as well as access to their experts And even in the South African market, they went on to make a limited range of design Converse built out of people who they'd found through this project. So really well-rounded approach to building a community and collaboration. And similarly, I think the notion of collaboration can happen in a more sporadic and reactive way. We all got front row seats to Audi and Brewdog as they squared off on Twitter, which I did have fun. Audi took the first dig at Brewdog with their anti-establishment IPA, which I must say did really tickle me. Brewdog quickly fired back with this sort of tongue-in-cheek collab. And of course, this immediately gathered lots of traction, people stoking the fire, egging on the collab, demanding stockists, and even actually giving specific creative feedback on that collaboration, which was all interacted with and collaborated with James, their CEO. And then this actually, since then, has become a thing that you can buy on the website. And I think that is partly coming out of that commitment to the creative opportunity, but the collaboration that surrounded it with the brand and with the audience. And I think when we kind of zoom out on all of these points, they are all a reminder that it's really vital to focus on speaking to your audience and not just at them, not assuming that the social cut down of the TV asset will do the job, especially when the audience feel more primed than ever for that sense of involvement, for that sense of interaction, and to have a say in what you're doing. And I think really the big wins next year are going to happen when brands truly consider co-creation alongside consumption. And I think those who embrace this mentality into everything they do will be the most successful brands outright, let alone on social. So I'm going to hand over now to Essie, who's our head of strategy, and she's going to make a case for social as a force for good.
Lovely, thank you very much, Paddy. So finally, third part, where I'll argue that when in right hands, social can indeed be a force for good. Controversial, potentially, but here we go, let's see how we do. So before we get into the kind of the proof points of why I think social can be a force for good, I wanted to touch on this kind of widely shared narrative the tabloid media in particular love, and that is the narrative of social being nothing less than pure evil. Social is said to be quite toxic. We also know that it's bad for your mental health. It's even worse for democracy. And don't even let me get started on those famous attention spans and development for young people in particular. Apparently, it's also making our real life experiences less pleasurable. It's making us less engaged, making us worse at socialization, and making us just generally less interested in anything that happens beyond those famous screens. And what doesn't really help are these hugely popular documentaries that seem to come out annually now, like The Social Dilemma this year by Netflix, where we see this kind of near dystopian universe where the machine kind of fully controls the man and there's absolutely nothing that we can do about it. And there's this quite sensationalist, I think relatively unproductive narrative that doesn't do anything to solve these social issues that it talks about. And that's what I think they are. I think the issues that are often blamed on social reach far beyond social media platforms. And I think these are social issues and we can potentially use social media to solve them. And what happened this year, so 2020 has been a hugely turbulent year for the best of us. Some call 2020 an apocalypse. Others said it's a much needed look in the mirror. And that's what I think it has been for social, kind of a look in the mirror, because it's forced us to almost redefine what the role of social truly was and what we want it to be in the future as well. And I think it's really shown us that maybe we don't have to do as the kind of platforms tell us and try to guide us, but maybe we can just by shifting our own behavior, shift the course of social media. And there are three key points that I believe help to kind of silence the critics and position social as a force for good. And first up, we've got one of the biggest civil rights movements in our lifetime. I'm sure this has escaped no one. So this year brought this heightened sense of urgency to address inequality, as we saw millions of people around the world protest against racism and kind of look for solace during the coronavirus pandemic, which we know has disproportionately impacted people of color. And undeniably, one of the most pressing functions of social media this year has been its current role in activism. And although this kind of potential for this online inspired or social media inspired change is by no means anything new, we have been talking about it for the last couple of years, really. 2020 has really showcased it on a whole new level. So what did it mean for social in particular? So we saw loads of Black Lives Matter activists use social to help their efforts. Facebook events were used to organize protests, as were Facebook groups, and influencers took to their kind of individual accounts to educate their networks, showcase support, and really just to take a stand, whether that was on Instagram Live or Instagram Stories or on YouTube. And while these kind of in-person, real-life protests then erupted across the world, I think the movement gained much of its speed on social in particular. And it wasn't just BLM, it was also, LGBTQ plus rights, it was trans rights. We kind of saw this movement of activism all across social. And what I thought was really interesting is that Twitter's year in review came out this week, and it was super clear that activism really dominated the 2020 world on Twitter. So George Floyd was the third most tweeted about person this year, right behind Trump and Biden. And this very poignant tweet was the third most retweeted tweet of the year. And Reddit looked very similar as well. So they've been reviewing what the year of 2020 looked like as well. And two of the most upvoted posts were about police brutality. And they also counted a nearly 10,000% year-on-year increase in the Black Lives Matter community on Reddit, where the most kind of discussed topics were around George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and systemic racism in general. And I think it's really interesting. It's important to remember that with Black Lives Matter, it isn't a new movement. It started back in 2013. So this kind of massive increase in attention this year, it is really interesting. Equally, a thread called police brutality on Reddit was the #1 activism community by subscribers created this year. So I think in 2020 overall, social media proved or almost provided this platform for really honest conversation and movement unlike any other channel. So don't think it's evil. I think it's a brilliant place for driving activism. Point number 2. So for a while now, we've lived in this world where old, white, rich men rule. And there's been little hope for anyone else, really, especially the young, to make a difference. But I think in 2020, social media acted as a key leveler for making that difference. And in terms of what it looked like, so 2020 showed that with the help of social, we were able to kind of shift and give power to the young. And I think one of the most interesting cases of this has obviously been the legend that is Marcus Rashford. So he's been very passionate in his efforts to combat child hunger across England, following his kind of efforts over the summer, where he was able to change the course of the UK government's decision to provide free meals for underprivileged children during the summer school holidays. And all of this started with a tweet, an open letter to all MPs in Parliament as well, and obviously fully exploded from there. And voter activism in general exploded across social, especially on platforms that were catered to a slightly younger audience like TikTok, Snapchat, and Instagram. And apparently in the US election, Snapchat alone helped more than 1 million users register to vote. And more than half of those were first-time voters, and more than 80% were younger than 30. So really tapping into that younger, hard-to-reach demographic. And brands kind of started to embrace this leveler mindset as well. So I think a really good example of this is the Deutsche Telekom ad, who enlisted Billie Eilish to celebrate this Gen Z tech positivity So rather than judging the generation for always being disconnected and out of touch with the real world, they actually embraced on what Gen Z can achieve with the help of technology. And social media has been criticized for spreading misinformation for a reason, but in 2020 it also became a really crucial source for education. So it will come as no surprise that the top hashtag of 2020 used by the most people on Twitter was none other than COVID-19. So not only was it kind of variations of it tweeted nearly 400 million times, but it was used to kind of share a huge amount of content about the situation in different countries that would not have reached the public otherwise. And equally, I think, and slightly unexpectedly maybe, TikTok stepped into the role of educator as well when the World Health Organization created an account on the platform and shared loads of different education content as well. And then loads of influencers and individuals followed that as well, which then played a massive role in educating the younger generations in particular. And what I thought was interesting from kind of more personal perspective, when the government rules about the tiered system were unclear, to say the least, this North London local restaurant called Top Cuvée, which is a firm born social favourite, they helped to kind of interpret the rules and kind of educated people in a way that they would not have been able to find that information otherwise. And then finally, social media kind of acted as a support channel for those who couldn't necessarily find that support elsewhere. So in the crisis, Reddit came to rescue. So all these Redditors kind of turned to each other and each other's help when it came to unemployment this year in particular, as the Reddit unemployment community recorded a massive 48,000% year-on-year activity increase, which is pretty major. And there's this really kind of heartwarming story about a lady who lost her job and talked about it on Reddit. And then that led to a totally random Reddit user sending her 90 quid to cover her water bill, and someone else messaged her with tips on how to get in touch with the local unemployment office as well, which is very, very wholesome. So overall in 2020, I think social media really helped to level the playing field. And then the final proof point is about accountability. So I think social media really stepped up to keep both themselves, so the social media platforms, and brands in check as well. So social media showed how it can be a real agent of change. The first example is a slightly controversial one potentially because it highlights the kind of underlying problem with Facebook in particular. But we all remember the big Facebook boycott of 2020, where some of the world's most famous and kind of powerful brands pulled their ad budgets from Facebook and Instagram, kind of in order to combat those hate issues on the platforms. And yes, most of these advertisers are very much now back on Facebook, and no, it did not have an impact on the bottom line. But I think this year, under that very intense pressure, Facebook has tightened their policies on, what users can and can't post. They have hired a VP of civil rights, and they have taken these multiple steps towards being a more responsible platform, as you can see here in the civil rights audit on the right. I would argue that they have done more than ever this year to become a kind of a safer, more responsible platform as well. So it may not be enough, but I think it is a step in the right direction. Twitter as well has made some pretty significant moves to combat the spread of misinformation on the platform. They released these labels to flag content, that simply isn't true, like most of Trump's tweets. But seriously speaking, they released a stat saying that more than a third of Trump's tweets have been flagged for disinformation since the election day, which is pretty shocking, really. And again, it might be a small change, but it definitely is a positive change that they're doing this as a social media platform. And then finally, I think social media kind of forced brands to reevaluate their purpose and values. So we all remember this story from earlier on this year when McDonald's, kind of in an act of solidarity, they decided to separate the beautiful golden arches in Brazil to represent social distancing, which did not go well on social. And then McDonald's, alongside a couple of other brands, they really received this backlash for being tone deaf during the pandemic. And I think that fear of the potential backlash on social really forced brands to evaluate what they can and should say in a time of crisis as well. And I do really hope that it made brands consider kind of what they stand for and what their brand purpose truly means, kind of beyond those famous brand guidelines. So yes, I think in 2020, social media changed, but it also caused change as well. And overall, in 2020, we kind of turned social media to connect and to cope. And yes, it's a very complex channel. And yes, I think the platform should do a lot more to moderate and regulate content. But ultimately, I do think that in the right hands, social media can definitely be a force for good. Thanks very much. Let's move on to the Q&A.
Thank you, Essie. Thanks, guys. So many insightful observations and thoughts there. I have no doubt at this point everyone is in agreement that social, well, it's been a pivotal one for social. I'm sure you've forgotten all about our polls at this point, but I will refresh your memory. Actually, we've seen the results validated, what the guys have talked through. So if you use social media more or less this year, 54% said way more. The rest of you largely said a bit more as well. So we're seeing an increase there. Did you embrace new platforms? 66% of you dabbled, 22% of you in a big way. Those of you engaged with features for the first time, so 46% had a play and 31%, yeah, you bet I did, got really stuck in there. So again, a shift in that direction as the majority. When it comes to participation in social activism, 49% of you got sharing, 80% of you got loud, 24% of you liked. So there was definite trends and movements in a positive direction there. A split between positive and neutral impact on your lives, but much lower response for having a negative impact, which is obviously great to hear. And finally, 75% of you confirmed that social played a bigger role in your marketing strategy than you expected it and planned it to, which is crazy. But really interesting stuff. We do have some questions, and we've got about 10 minutes left, so we'll try and use as much time as possible to get through them. So, Callum, I'll start with you. For those keen to make social the lead channel kind of post-pandemic, when it's not when it's more of a choice maybe, are there any challenges people should be prepared for?
Yeah, great question. Yes, there are a lot of challenges. I would say that probably the main one to think about is that unlike other lead channels, social isn't really just one channel. It's actually a collection, as we went through, it's a collection of lots of different spaces and environments, each of which require nuance and understanding and different executions and potentially different ideas as well. So I think that is the main shift that marketers will have to make in adopting social as a lead channel, is actually moving more towards kind of campaigns that play out over ecosystems of different assets that kind of work together in interesting ways, rather than just leading with one big asset. I think that's the big shift that marketers have to make to lean into that. But I think that's a good thing. I think that is going to be a good shift to make as well. So yeah, I'd say that's the main one.
Great, thank you. Paddy, lots of interest in co-creation. In the past, and I'm sure there's a blog on this somewhere that people can dig out, we've talked about brands killing memes. Brands do find it really hard to get involved in emerging social culture. Is co-creation a fail-safe approach to this?
Yeah, it's a great question. We've talked a lot about that. Yeah, and there's a silence brand response for a reason. I think naturally co-creation offers you an easier way in if it's being made by real people. Not only does it add that credibility that it has a sense of reality to it, but it's also probably slightly more specific and nuanced than you can get as a brand. Undoubtedly, those people understand the subcultures and are more immersed in them than you are. So I absolutely think it is, and I think a lot of the brands who work with creators, especially on TikTok, do that. They find those people who just understand what their audience want and let them play with their brand and come back to them with something that feels culturally relevant, and then they either leave it there or they cross-pollinate it onto their channels, and that feels like it's been a really effective way into culture without just being battered away with not another silenced meme.
Brilliant. Essie, we've got a couple of people from SMEs and smaller businesses. Is there a way that they can use these trends to maximize their social presence, considering they've got big ambitions but smaller budgets and awareness? Are these things still accessible to them?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think it necessarily has always to do with budgets. I think it's more about, outsmarting, not outspending. And I think a lot of stuff that Paddy talked about as well when it comes to creative, yes, kind of organic reach might be dead on Facebook, but it's still very much live on these newer platforms like TikTok. There's some really interesting stuff happening on Twitch at the moment where you don't necessarily need massive budgets to get onto. And also this idea of co-creation as well, it's like knowing your audience, who are you talking to, what can you provide to them that is incredibly valuable, and almost learn from them as well. What is the type of stuff that they want to see, and building that sense of, I guess, advocacy within a small group of people first. I think that's a really great place to start from for smaller businesses in particular.
Yeah, great. I've just seen another question come in that would be great for you. Someone Shona works for a charity, and I think internally there's some conversation or sense that kind of work on social is unethical, and so taking on that view that social is evil. What would you suggest she do in terms of approaching changing perception?
Was this for me as well?
Yeah, please.
I think it's all about education, and most of the time that can be a kind of a long conversation that you need to have both internally and externally. But showing examples of brands who are doing it. Brands aren't getting into this space of activism just to look good, but there's an actual reason wanting to help people, and giving these examples, educating people internally who might not otherwise be up for it, and kind of being ready for the fight, I suppose.
Yeah, agreed. Callum, we have touched upon it in a little bit in various in parts, but looking at paid social, obviously with kind of Facebook boycott, there's been a lot of I guess like conversation and action around it. What would we say we've seen from paid social this year, and do we expect that to change next year?
Yeah, I think paid social's having a really interesting time this year. I think on a broader level, what we will see and continue to see is short-term objectives people are pushing towards short-term objectives because we are in a recession, budgets are under pressure, and short-term returns are basically under a lot of pressure at the moment. I think we have to remember that, particularly with paid social budgets, you're going to get the best returns if you can balance the long-term stuff with the short-term stuff. So I think that is an interesting thing to think about at the moment, is yes, with the swing to e-commerce and the short-term pressures, those kind of those short-term results are good to think about, but we have to balance it, particularly as we go into next year. I think that's a good thing to think about.
Yeah, great advice. And a kind of a final question for you all. Is there anything we hope stays in 2020? Paddy, I'll come to you first.
Yeah, I think the two things that I like from that Venn diagram are the want for imperfection, or the openness for imperfection. I think like the done is better than perfect mentality summarizes 2020, and that's made brands go way further into areas that they wouldn't have before and feel like there's less need for them to have it nailed or for it to be the highest standard of production, for example. I absolutely think that sense of experimentation and just committing to something should continue. And then the other one, just this need for joy. Like, people have been in a pretty bad place this year and brands have felt the need to provide that. I think it's so important to continue to carve that out, especially if we go back to reality in some way. Brands should still play that role and figure out how they can just bring joy to people.
Nice. Essie, anything you want to leave in 2020?
Anything that I think we shouldn't take on to 2021, yeah?
Yeah, leave it in 2020?
What I want to leave in 2020 is cancel culture. I think that can be a very kind of a negative space. I think shaming people for something they've done 10 years ago or a month ago is just a very unproductive thing to do, especially when it's just on Twitter, kind of being anonymous. So yeah, cancel culture is something that we should definitely leave to 2020.
I'm sure you're not alone. Callum?
Yeah, and I'll go back to my original case. I think the perception that social should just be a support channel should be left to history. Now is the time for social to be that lead channel for brands.
Oh, fantastic. What a fantastic way to end. Okay, sadly, we are out of time, so we need to leave it there for today and this year. A big thank you to all of our panelists for such great content, as always. And of course, thank you to all of you for joining us. I hope you enjoyed it. As I said at the start, in our follow-up, you can expect the recording and a link to the slides. But we'll also be giving you the inside scoop on our January event, which is going to be a big one. So we'll be launching our latest bit of original thinking in our white paper, which is going to help you channel these seismic shifts in social, hard to say, seismic shifts in social, into industry-leading social-first marketing strategy. So it's really not to be missed. Hopefully we will see you then. But for now, that's all that's left to do is to wish you a very Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.